Good afternoon. Welcome to Evolve Through God. My name is Angela Goodman. I am the host of this podcast and likely many more to come. I'm super excited today for our guest. I have Amanda Hietter on with me today, and I met her through a networking community here in actually local to Northern Virginia. The founder is anyway, but originally from St. Louis, and she is also from St. Louis. So I can't wait to dive more into her story. You guys are going to love it. So Amanda, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Angela. I'm so excited to be here.
I just can't even, your energy in person is so infectious. You
Oh,
always have a smile on your face. You are always so happy and cheerful, at least the time that we met in person. And every time we've talked on the phone or even text messages, like I can feel how positive your energy is. But I know your life has not been the easiest.
no.
Yeah. So I don't want to take up too much more of the time because I want you to be able to share your story in the event that it can help other people. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. So
Super excited.
let's talk a little bit. Let's start with, so I know a little bit about your story, but not a lot. So let's talk about, how you first were introduced to God or the concept of God. What did that look like for you in your life?
Yeah, so I was raised in a Christian household where my parents went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening. It was that kind of home that I was raised in. So my parents were very, very strong believers. And so at the age of 5, I was very young. I came to know Christ, and I remember being in my room and just thinking about, because it was a Sunday evening, and thinking about church that morning and how I knew I was going to go to hell if I did not ask the Lord to come into my life and be the Lord over my life. I remember that very vividly, surprisingly, at the age of 5. And so my dad talked me through that and led me to the Lord. And as I grew older, I started falling away from God. So that's a whole story that I'm going to share.
Well, I know that we're gonna dive into that, but I don't want to skip over. So at the age of 5, you can remember that so vividly. That's amazing. That's
Yes.
amazing. So what did your dad say? Do you remember what he said in order to talk you through what you were going through?
Because I was so young, I only remember like tiny little pieces. I remember having this like aha moment. I was in my room I think it was with my sister. She was 2 years younger than me. And so we were playing, and I was like, okay, like thinking about the day and how I knew I was not going to go to heaven if I did not trust in the Lord and bring him into my life. And my parents always had people over after church. So there was a whole group of adults all sitting out in the kitchen and the living room. And I kind of went out and interrupted them. I tended to do that, being the oldest child. I was always wanting to be with the adults, thinking that I was older than I really was. And I said, Daddy, I don't think I'm going to heaven. Can we talk through this? And so my dad, I remember he had an excitement on his face of, oh my goodness, at such a young age, she wants to give her life to the Lord. And so I remember we went back to my room, and my dad always said how important it was to get on your knees and pray to God. So I remember we were just sitting on the floor of my bedroom and then kind of turning towards my bed and just praying to God like this and repeating what he was telling me. Because at the age of 5, there's the communication is not as.
No, but that's so powerful. Yeah.
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 So I remember that I was really excited that I had made that decision and, really started getting involved in church and singing, because singing is something that I actually do. And so sang in multiple musicals and things like that, and just loving God and wanting to share my love for him with so many others.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So then you alluded to a little bit ago, like you had a falling away.
Yeah.
When did that kind of start? Did you continue through going to church as a kid? Like when did you kind of start for things to change a little bit?
So I was homeschooled until I was age of 13. So I was not put into the public school system until 8th grade. And as I look back and have been sharing my testimony more and more, I realized that was the time that I started to fall away from God, because I started to hang around the wrong crowd. And as I got older into high school, I still was like, believed in God and was very involved in church, but the people I was hanging around with did not go to church and did not believe in God. And so as I got older into my junior and senior year, I really started to do things that weren't healthy and, sneaking
Mm.
out of the house with a boy and
Mm.
and just not making very smart decisions. So that was really when I started to fall away, was more into like my upper high school years, like junior and senior years, when I really felt myself pull away, didn't go to church as much, tried to get out of going to church. And then after that was when the real chaos started.
And what was that? So that time period, if you, as you were falling away, do you ever remember anything that happened that where you might have seen him try to bring you back?
Um, so I almost sometimes look back and think at the age of 5 that I was so young. I knew what I was doing, but I didn't really have like that actual personal relationship with God. Like I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I turned my life to him, but there wasn't that relationship. I read the Bible. I did the whole like praying before I ate, saying my prayers before bed, but there wasn't that like true relationship with God. So I mean, looking back, I don't ever see that God was pulling me back. He probably was. And I just was not aware of it because,
Mm-hmm.
again, I wasn't having the daily prayer like I do now. I was not
Mm-hmm.
reading my Bible daily like I do now and being very intentional with my relationship. I always say, like, a marriage or relationship with your kids, it's so models the relationship with God, because if you don't communicate with your children, with your spouse, you start to drift apart. And that's where divorces
Mm.
happen. That's where families fall apart. And it's so important to have those daily conversations with family and with your spouse and
Mm-hmm.
with the Lord. And the Lord is
Yeah.
the most important. So
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that. And I think that I just was like, at that point, drifted so far away that if he was pulling me back, I was just not listening at all.
And what was your home life like during that time? Were things strained at home? Is that part of what was going
No,
on? No? No.
honestly, no.
You were
And
just rebelling. You were being
I,
rebellious.
yes, I honestly was one of those children that tended to like hide the things I was doing because I would sneak out in the middle of the night. My parents would know about it and would try to put on this persona of, oh, I'm good. I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to, and I'm still a Christian and doing the
Mm.
things. But really, behind closed doors, my parents, my mom worked, my dad worked. We were a singing family, so we would travel all over the place singing.
Oh,
So I
wow.
could put on this face that I was something that
Mhm.
I was not. And parents, me as a parent as well, I have 2 kids. Sometimes we don't realize, unless we're like really in our kids' heads and like listening to everything and trying to dive and ask questions. I don't think that they even realized that I was drifting away until it
Mm.
happened. And it was a big thing that happened that made me, well, we'll get into that part of the
I was
story
gonna
first.
say, no, no, no. What was it? Let's do it. What was that?
Yeah.
What was that moment for you?
So the moment where I really drifted away from my family and God and just completely separated myself was I was 17 years old and I met a guy. This was right after I'd graduated from high school. So in between my senior year and starting college. And I met this boy and I thought he was just the most handsome man ever. And so when we started hanging out, I had a curfew, obviously, being at the age I was, and I was a rebellious child. So I was
Mhm.
like, curfew?
Mhm.
Well, okay, I'll get home at 10 o'clock, but then I'm going to do what I want when they go to bed. So I started sneaking out with him.
Mm.
And when I started sneaking out with him, he was actually the first person that I had sexual relations with.
Mhm.
And so, as being a homeschooled child, I did not go through health class. I knew about protection, but didn't utilize it,
Mm.
and ended up getting pregnant
Oh,
at
wow.
the age of 17. Um, so that was honestly like a scary thing. I was a kid having a
Yeah.
kid,
Yeah.
and
And
so
how old was he?
he was the same age as me. So he was
Oh, he was the
literally
same
a
age. Okay.
month older. So
Okay.
I
So
turned
he didn't have any clue either. You were just
no.
two kids not knowing what was going on. Okay.
Exactly. We were 2 kids not knowing what was going on. And so I actually, my parents caught me sneaking out one morning because I was not there and because I
Mm.
stayed out a little past when I should have.
Mm.
And they ended up trying to ground me. And I said, I'm leaving. So I ended up packing up all my stuff and moving into this 1-bedroom apartment with 5 people and sleeping in this little tent in a bedroom with with my boyfriend's friend at the time. And it was just like, it was a whole crazy life that I was living.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I didn't know I was pregnant at that time, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have had very irregular menstrual cycles. And I remember when had moved in, my best friend was actually living with me. And that's why I moved
Mm-hmm.
into this apartment. And we were at the laundromat and she was like, Amanda, when was the last time you had a menstrual cycle? And I was like, oh, it's been like a month and a half or two or something. I was like, that's normal. And she goes, I think maybe you should get a pregnancy test. And I was like, okay. And so we ended up getting a package of them and I took 3 different ones and all 3 of them were positive. And I
Oh,
remember just
wow.
like falling to the floor and just sitting there on the tile floor in the bathroom and thinking, this is not happening. I had just turned 18. I think this was like in September and I turned 18 in August. So I was like, I am so young and I'm going to birth a child. And I remember one of the other things I thought is I never wanted to have kids because I had said I was the oldest. I kind of raised my sisters and was always babysitting. I was like, I never want to have kids of my own. But I still had that mentality of it's not okay to have an abortion because that the Lord creates a life for a purpose. And so when I found out I was having her, I was like, well, this is just going to be how it is. Either I'm going to give her up for adoption or I'm going to keep her. And so obviously I decided to keep her and she's one of the loves of my life. Yeah. She's almost 22. Crazy to think it's been that long ago. But I'm so grateful because she honestly saved my life when I look back at how she made me change from the craziness I was going into and how she came and made me become an adult.
So you find this out. You're sitting there with your friends. You find this out. Do you go back home at that point?
So I tried to keep it from my parents. Of course, they knew. They said that they could tell that I was growing in the air and I was constantly eating food. I would go over to their house and be like, oh, I'm so hungry. And I would wear these like big overalls or like big oversized sweatshirts or whatever I could. And my parents said they knew. I actually waited until I think I was almost 5 months pregnant to tell them because I was so afraid. I was like, this is not the way I was raised. And so when I told them, they actually offered for me to come move back in with them so that they could support me because I was working like minimum wage job trying to, pay for housing and all the things that come with being an adult on your own. And so I moved back in with them. And then, when I did move back in with them, my boyfriend actually moved in as well. And he was living out in like our rec room. And he honestly was someone that was just not a very good person. So he ended up, after I had my daughter, he cheated on me and I ended up leaving him. So he stole money from me. He cheated on me and I left him. And then I finally decided to move out on my own. And so that's where the next part of my story comes into play. So when I moved out on my own, I was very lonely because I was a young mom. I was about 19 at this point, and my daughter was about a year and a half old. And I was
how old was she when you left him?
So she was only about 6 months. He very quickly, when she was born, he wanted a boy, and we didn't find out what we were having until I birthed her. That was the one surprise I wanted. I was like, I've done everything backwards in my life. I want to do one thing where I can have a surprise. So I thought I was having a boy. And when she came out as a girl, I was so ecstatic. And his first response was, well, I guess you got what you wanted. And that's
what a nice guy.
Yeah. That's when I kind of knew, okay, this is probably not going to work out because he was very disinterested with her from the very beginning. And he kind of started separating himself from us and ended up, like I said, I found out he was cheating on me. He stole money from me. So that was a whole thing. But as I kind of separated myself from him and realized how he was not a good person to have in my life, I ended up meeting another man that I thought was someone that was going to be good for me. And I met him at a bar, and he was an alcoholic and a drunk when I met him. So very quickly on, he ended up being very physically abusive very quickly on into our relationship. And I endured that for about 8 years. And during that 8 years, we actually had a son together. His name is Braden. He's my second love of my life. And when I finally get out of that situation, that is really like where my heart is at, is women that have been through physical violence, because I stayed in that situation for so long because he pulled me away from family, he pulled me away from friends, he pulled me away from having a job, and I was all alone. And it's
Yeah.
really hard to leave being a woman
Yeah.
when you have no one there.
At that time, as you're going through all of this trauma and stress, at any point in time, do you remember whether or not you came back to God, like to your roots? Did you pray? Did you talk? Or did you just sit in silence with what you were going through?
So I went to church. So I went to church and did the things like, that Christians are supposed to do. But I
Yeah.
was not reading my Bible. I was not praying. I was going to church and trying to be in a community, but there was still no relationship with God, no
Okay.
personal relationships.
When
I
did you
still was.
start going back to church?
So I started going back to church. Honestly, like I was always kind of going to church in and out. Like I would go to church and then I would stop and I would go and I would stop. So during like the time I was with my daughter's dad, I was not going. And then when I got with my son's dad, we ended up starting to go to church very quickly on our relationship, because I was already kind of starting to go back into church, met him, and then I started singing on the praise team, and he was helping out with like the AV at the church. So we were very involved.
Okay.
And then we ended up, more to my story, my parents ended up moving away to the Netherlands.
Oh.
And that was one big thing. Like my family moved away. My middle sister was living all the way down in Carbondale, and I was up in Decatur, Illinois. So that was like 4 hours away. And then my youngest sister moved with my parents overseas.
Okay.
So that all my family was far away. And so as my family all was like in different places, that's where I kind of really depended a lot on Billy, which was my son's dad, to take care of us. I didn't work. And after I had my son, he ended up having colic. And so when you have a child with colic and they're crying all the time and crying for 8 hours straight, that causes a lot of stress on the family. And so that's where, because Billy at the time was not drinking. He had slowly pulled away from that, but then he went back to drinking heavily because he would come home. I would be stressed out. The kids would be running around. My daughter was 5 at the time, and my son was, 3 months old, crying. And so he would go hide down in the basement. And during this times, I would go running down to the basement. We'd get into an argument, and that's where the abuse would start, because I would be home all day with the kids, and then he'd be working. And so during that time of the abuse, I realized I needed to get out, because if I didn't get out, I was going to die. Because one of the times he slammed my head up against a concrete wall over and over again. And another time took my head and slammed it against the stairs repetitively. I had bruises all up and down my face. And I was so afraid to call the cops, because I knew that if I did, potentially I could go to jail, or, I could be taken away from my kids. And so I was very fearful. So when I finally decided to get out, I went to my parents in the Netherlands, lived with them for 3 months. And that was like the first time I had peace, because I had that support system again. But then when I moved back, because, I can't stay over there permanently. I didn't have like a permanent visa. When I moved back, I ended up letting Billy back into our lives again. And the abuse started again and continued to get worse and worse and worse. And so then my parents were actually moving home from the Netherlands. And when they were moving back home, they were moving down to Georgia. And so my first thought process was, the only way I'm actually going to be able to get away from my abuser, because I kept letting him back into my life, even during all this abuse, is if I moved a couple states away. And so I finally did end up moving away after I graduated with my associate's degree, and that abuse stopped. Thank goodness. So yeah, that was a rough time in my life, but I've forgiven him because of God. So let that go.
What was the final straw for you, knowing that you were capable of getting out?
I look back, and there was just honestly so many of them. I went to jail one time. That's a whole story. And it was not my fault. That was a big straw, and I still let him back into my life.
You went to jail. What did you go to jail for?
Yeah. So I always loved to go out dancing. That was like my release for me. That's one thing I still love to do, is to go out dancing. And I had a friend
Yeah.
over. He was one of my gay friends at the time, and we were getting ready to go out. And my my son's dad, Billy, did not like me to ever do anything without him. He never wanted me to go out anywhere. He didn't want me to go hang out with friends, even for dinner. He was very controlling. And
Mm.
so when we were getting ready to go out, my friend was actually carrying a box with my shoes in it. And he was walking down the hallway, and Billy just like decked him in the face and knocked him out cold. Like he just fell on the ground. So I
Oh
just
my
saw
God.
red and like jumped on top of Billy and was like screaming at, like, just, I don't really remember much. I just know I jumped on him, and I must have like scratched his neck or something. And so I called the cops. The cops came. My friend would not press charges against Billy. So then the cops go, well, yeah,
What?
yeah.
Why?
He was too inebriated at the time.
Oh,
He was just so out
jeez.
of it. That was another thing, is there was a lot of alcohol involved in all
Okay.
of this. And
Yeah.
so the cops said, well, somebody's going to jail today. So they started interviewing me and Billy. And obviously my friend wouldn't press charges. So they kind of just removed him from the situation. They ended up finding out that Billy had a scratch on his neck, and they asked who did it. And he said it was me. So I was the one that went to jail that night. I was in a jail cell for about 8 hours, and they ended up dropping the charges and everything. And even when they were taking me to jail in the car, they're like, "We're so sorry. We know that you're not the one that caused this, but this is just what we have to do." And this is where the legal system is so broken, where what happened to me should not have happened. It should
Right.
have been Billy going to jail. The cops had been at my house probably 10
Oh
times.
yeah, I'm sure you had plenty of prior calls. Yeah. Did he
Mhm.
ever go to jail during any of those times?
Nope.
Never.
Never. Only thing they would ever do is say, you need to leave the premises. Like, you need to find somewhere else to stay. I don't understand why they never took him to jail. Like, I look back and go,
Was there
why?
no physical signs of abuse on
Nope.
you? And that's why
Hmm.
he was calculated enough that he didn't
Oh
do
yeah,
any of that.
for sure. For
Oh
sure. Very
wow.
calculated. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
I'm so
I guess,
sorry all of that happened to you.
I always use those words of Kelly Clarkson. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
And honestly, I look back, and that the one verse that really just resonates with me is Romans 8:28, that
Hmm.
all bad is used for the good, for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And everything I've been through, and that's only 2/3 of my story, Angela. There's a whole other
Oh,
part of it.
I know. I knew today was going to be a full day.
Oh, yes. Yes. I just look back and go, thank you, Lord, because there are so many times that I could have died with the abuse that I went through. And then my daughter saw a lot of that too, and the trauma that she's been through.
Oh,
It's just absolutely crazy. But she's doing amazing now, excelling so much in life, and it's wonderful.
that's because she has a good role model who's very
No,
grounded. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so you end up going to jail. You
Mhm.
made the very short declaration that you let him back after that. So
Yes.
you went to jail, you let him back into your life after you got out.
Mhm.
What was that final like, I this is ridiculous. I have to get out of this.
So I was going to college, getting my associate's degree, because I had my daughter so young, and I was like, I want to make something of myself. I want my kids to know that you can do whatever you put your heart or mind to.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was getting ready to finish, it was my final semester of getting my associate's degree. I took classes on Saturdays because I worked full time as well, and I sometimes would be forced to take my daughter with me to school because Billy would say, well, she's not my daughter. I'm not watching her. And so that was really a very trying time for me. I still look back and go, thank God for that wonderful teacher that allowed me to bring her. I was taking a final
Yeah.
exam with my daughter by my side. She was like,
Yeah.
let's see, she was, I think, 9 years. Yeah, she was 9 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
And I just, oh my goodness, Lord, thank you, Lord, that you allowed me to have a wonderful teacher like that. And the abuse was getting worse and worse. He would throw things at me, and my daughter was getting older. My son was getting older. So the final straw was I did not want my kids to continue to grow up in a home full of abuse and thinking it's okay. One, I did not want my daughter to think it's okay to
Right.
have
And end up
a
in the same
husband.
situation herself later in
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I did not want my son to think it's okay to abuse a woman. So that was really the final straw. And I actually contacted my parents because they were moving back to the States and asked them if it would be okay for me to move in with them so I could get far away. And they said, of course. So thank the Lord that I was able to get out of that situation. And I just look back on that and think if I would have stayed in that any longer, the way it was progressing, I probably would be dead. And I have no idea where my kids would be. So
Do you think he played a part in your parents coming back to the States?
somewhat. I know that because my kids were the age they were, my parents wanted to be close to them too. And I would call them a lot whenever I would be in these situations. And I know as a mother, my mom was really hurting knowing that she couldn't be there to protect me. And my
Right.
dad and I had a very strained relationship during this time. Thank the Lord it's been restored over the last couple of years, but our relationship really fell apart when I left the home at the age of 18. And literally for like 25 years, my dad and I did not really have a relationship. So it was really my mom that kind of pushed for them to move home to get closer to their kids and their grandkids.
Okay. So you move back in with your parents. You're now in Georgia. You have your
Yeah.
associates at this point in time.
Yes.
So what does the next step look like? Do you remember at that point? Or have you reconnected yourself yet? Or you're still about to go on yet another disconnected journey?
Another disconnected journey. So I did start going to church a lot more regularly once I moved in with my parents down in Georgia. And during this time, I was really getting more in shape. I was running 5Ks a lot, really got into shape, taking care of my body, taking care of my health. Had gotten my associate's degree, so I was working a really great job at a law firm. And so, about 6 months after moving in with my parents, I went on this 5K run in Atlanta and met this guy that I just thought he was the sweetest person. He was totally opposite of what I was usually attracted to. And we became friends really, really quickly. And our relationship escalated fast. Within like 1 week of knowing each other, we were already having sex. Within I think less than 6 months of us dating, we ended up moving in together. And he had 3 kids with his previous relationship, and I had my 2. And the reason that I was so heavily attracted to him is he became that dad figure that my kids did not have.
Yeah.
And so I really craved that. That was really what I was craving, is someone to be my partner and someone to be a dad figure to my children. And so I would say the first year or so was wonderful. And then things started to really get bad. We were going to church together, but not regularly. We would go when we felt like it. And I would say about a year into our relationship, we started hanging out with his brother and his sister-in-law, and they would smoke marijuana on the regular, even in their house. They would smoke like in their bathroom and stuff towels under the door. And all the kids would be running around this tiny little apartment. You could smell it throughout the whole apartment. I'm like, what's the point of stuffing towels under the door? I don't get it. I look back. But that's when I really started dabbling in smoking marijuana. And everyone says, oh, marijuana is not the gateway drug. Oh, honey, yes, it is. It's definitely a gateway drug. And so I was already an alcoholic. I'd been an alcoholic since I was pretty much 18. So I've been addicted to that. Addictions run in my family, unfortunately. And so adding marijuana onto that just gave me an extra high and just made me feel all giddy and giggly. And I really got addicted to that very, very quickly. And during this time, Jerry and I, we both had entrepreneurial spirits. And so he decided to step out and to open his own auto repair shop. And I was working as a paralegal, as an office manager in an office, and I was not happy there. So I decided to step away from my job and help him at the auto repair shop. And during this time, one thing that, not to toot my own horn, but I'm really good at marketing. And so I really built up our business almost too fast, where he had so much business and not enough employees to help.
Mm-hmm.
So he started turning to cocaine to keep him up at night, to be able to work on these vehicles all throughout the night and to work days on end.
Wow.
And during this time, I actually started dabbling in cocaine as well, because alcohol and marijuana was not giving me enough of a high, because I had all of that past trauma that I just talked about that was still
Mm-hmm.
buried so
Mm-hmm.
deep.
Mm-hmm.
And then the issues we were having in our relationship of lack of trust, both of us both didn't really trust each other that much. I always thought he was cheating on me and him vice versa, because we both had very bad traumatic relationships. And so during this time, I started to get addicted to cocaine and realized that within about 6 months of utilizing it, I would have to do so many hits of it to even get a high. But then the downs that I would have, I would be screaming at my kids at the top of my lungs. I had such anger. I'd never felt such rage in my life. It was insane. And so I realized that I needed to stop, but I was still like drinking heavily and still smoking marijuana on the regular. And so then, with us being entrepreneurs, you know how it is. You're an entrepreneur as well. Sometimes times can get hard, and we had 5 kids we were supporting. And so not we, my husband at the time decided that he was going to start selling drugs out of our home. And so it started with marijuana. And I remember we would have these huge bags, like pounds of marijuana, and he would put them in these big tubs. And all the people that would come in and out of our house, Angela, I look back and go, oh my God, I cannot believe it.
And how long did that go on for?
That went on for over 2 years.
Holy moly.
It wasn't just that we were selling, because marijuana it turned to him selling cocaine. Then he started selling methamphetamine. He was selling pills. And he would go off and he'd work. Sometimes he'd go to customers' houses if he wasn't at the shop. And I would be at home with the kids, because sometimes he'd work all night and all day.
Oh my God.
If there was a customer that called him that needed an 8-ball of cocaine or whatever it would be, he would call me and say, hey, Amanda, pull out my scale. I need you to weigh this all out. And he's like, there's some cash in the drawer over here. So if they need change, here's what the change is. And they're going to be there in 15 minutes. And I would have to let these people into my home, being there by myself with my children, and do the exchange. And I, most of the time I was high as a kite or half drunk. So I look back and I go, man, I'm glad I wasn't fully present to experience a lot of that. Yeah. And I'm glad children, every time someone came into the home, were in their rooms or extracurricular activities. They never were really around when it happened. So God was protecting us through all of that. And I'm so grateful. So as this all progressed, my now ex-husband, he was my husband at the time, he actually turned to methamphetamine, and that was his next drug of choice because cocaine was too expensive. So as he turned to meth, things got worse. Anytime we get in a fight, he would pack up all of his stuff and leave. And so this was like a constant thing of him being in and out of the house. So that caused a lot of trauma for me. We were married and he'd just come and go. And I would find him texting other women, sending pictures of himself to other women, sending emails to other women. So there was constant cheating, and I kept putting up with that. And really kind of the final straw with our marriage was when I received an eviction notice that we were getting kicked out of our home.
So did you think he was paying the rent and he was not?
So to kind of backtrack, the last 2 years of our marriage, of us living together, he really was not in the home. I was running my own business. It was an MLM, and was making enough money to pay the bills for that year and a half, but COVID hit our house. And so it went from one child to the next child to me to him. So there was 2 months really of me not working and him not working. And because of that, there was no funds to pay even basic bills, like the water, power. Obviously, the rent was linked at the very bottom because you need food, you need the power. And so we got behind about 2 months of rent, and then we received an eviction notice. And I was given the ultimatum of either I go move in with Jerry and his mom in the inner city of Atlanta, and the home had no central heating or air and was cockroach infested, Or I can contact my parents that at that time they had moved back up to St. Louis, Missouri, because my mom has recently told me this. They moved away to get away from me because I was so in drugs and just like, just not,
They just couldn't deal with it.
they couldn't deal with it. So they moved up here to be closer to my mom's parents. And so I called them and said, can I move back in again? Mind you, this was like,
and I'm sure they wanted to say no. I'm sure they did. But what did they say?
They said, of course, but there's going to be rules and boundaries. So mind you, I was like 37 years old. Okay. And I was like, rules and boundaries. They said, we'll send you a contract.
And you were still using at that time and still drinking at that time and not working for anybody else. You had your own in an MLM. So you were doing that. And then the kids are what ages at this point?
So at this point, my son was 13, and then my daughter had just started her first year of college in Georgia. So I knew that I was going to have to leave her behind. And that was something that was really hard for me because I knew my daughter was not going to just pick up and leave school and move with me because of my trauma. That's not her problem. So they said, yes, of course you can move in, but there's rules. And so they sent me this contract. And I remember I was reading this and just was so angry. Some of the rules were I was not allowed to be out past midnight. I was not allowed to use drugs, which at that time I was like, why? That's so stupid. Like, I don't understand this. I was required to go to church every Sunday. I was required to get a full-time job because I was working for myself at the time. And my parents said that doesn't suffice. You have to get a job and make your own income. And there was other things in this list of rules, but those were the 4 that were like, I have to be home by midnight. What am I, 12? Like, I was so angry. But when I moved in with them and started my life living with them, that's when my life really started to change around.
So at that point, okay. So your mindset at that, so this is after COVID, right? So this isn't that long ago. What are we talking, like 4 years ago?
This is 2021.
Okay. So so like 4 years ago, and you're obviously not clear on your own accord yet. So you felt like there was zero other choice but to move back in with them and accept whatever it was that they gave you.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So when you do that, do you do it with a rebellious heart? Do you do it knowing you're going to go back up there and just do whatever you want to do? Or do you legitimately at that point say, this is the condition my life is in and I really need to turn it around?
Honestly, a mix of both, because I knew I needed to turn it around. And those previous 2 years, I was starting to dive into my Bible more and pray more, but there still wasn't that intentional relationship with God. It was, I'm doing the acts and I would see God working in my life. He would provide all the finances for me every month. I remember somebody gave me $1,000 to help pay for my rent one time. And I was like, okay, I would thank God for it. But there wasn't that genuine, real relationship with him like I have now. It's so different now than it was then. But God was slowly pulling me back then. Yeah. He was like, okay, Amanda. And preparing me for what was coming ahead. And so when I moved in with them, though, my son actually came to the Lord and got baptized when I moved in with my parents, which was so amazing. And that's when I was like, wow, okay. Just in that 6-month period of time living with my parents, how things just looked up so much from then. Being or surrounded by drugs in such a dark environment, and then being in such a positive environment where I was with a church family that loved me. And that's when I actually went on a missions trip. And for the first time in my life, I'd never been on a missions trip. And I was 38 at this time, or almost 38, I think, right around that time. Yeah, it was about a year later. I realized how when you're serving and giving to other people, how you can shut off all the cares and worries. You know how it is. Everyone knows. We worry about finances. We worry about stability. We worry about family, friends. We worry about a lot of things. But when you're continually serving for 12 hours a day, other people that have so much more needs than you, that's when you really see God work. And that's where my eyes were really open of like, wow, God is good. God is so good. Like,
where was your mission trip to?
It was to Panama.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a cool experience. I got to pray over people and just see how people have so little and how we have so much here in the United States. And it really just opened my eyes to how I need to start building the kingdom of God.
So did somebody pull you into that missions trip, or did you just find out about it and ask and be like, this is something I need to do? Like, did you have that inclination then?
So this was through my church. And because I love travel so much, I was like, I want to experience something that's different than just willy-nilly traveling just to travel. I wanted to experience intentional travel and be able to give back and show love. And at that time, my relationship with God had grown so much. I've always been in the past fearful to pray in front of other people. And I realized that the reason I was so fearful to pray was because I did not have a relationship with God. Because why should I worry about what others think? This is a conversation I'm having with God. This is not a conversation I'm having with another person. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So during that time, that's when it really was kind of like an aha moment for me of, this is me praying to God and asking for help for someone else. It's not me trying to impress someone. And that's what I always thought prayer was about, of using all these big words. And it's not about that. Really not.
No, it's not about that at all. Wow. I feel like we just started talking, but we're like pretty much like done with our time.
I know.
So I think we may have to do a second episode, but to get the rest of the story right in the last 4 years, because I know that God has moved very powerfully in your life in that period of time, and so I don't want to not share that part. So we'll get another episode, and we'll pick up from Panama forward.
Awesome.
During that one. But I do want to ask the questions that I typically ask all of my guests, because your story is so powerful. There are going to be people who relate to many aspects of it, from the abuse to the drugs to the just like intentional disobedience, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So I want to offer up the questions so that we can get some resources for people who may listen to part one also. So question number one is, what have you read or absorbed? So like, what have you experienced aside from the Bible that has allowed you to know God?
Oh gosh. I just read this book and now I can't think of the name of it for the life of me. It's, I think it's like We Are Worshipers. And so I have always been singing since I was a kid. And when I read this book, and this was very recent too, and it's just like, it really like hit me hard about how important it is to worship. And worship is not about us. And that's something that a lot of times that especially singers, people that sing on the praise team and they're up leading, it's like, okay, I got to be at the best. I got to make sure to sing the right words, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, it's not about that. It's really about just like allowing God to sing through you. And how that really kind of changed my mindset, because I just helped lead worship 2 days ago in church. And because I just finished this book literally like a week ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, like the experience was so different because I had a different mindset. So that's one book. And I'll have to clarify the name of it because it's actually my sister's and I gave it back to her.
Send it to me and we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes. Sure. Yes. Okay. That one definitely is one that has really hit me hard. And then I'm actually reading a fellow BLN member's book right now, and it's called Beyond the Brokenness by Rebecca Hope.
Okay.
And that is a really good one. She was born and raised in the Amish community, and her story somewhat kind of resonates with me because she went through so much hurt and confusion and not really understanding her relationship with God until she got out into the real world and really like started diving into the Bible, because she was going to church every Sunday. She was praying. She was doing the things.
Oh yeah. But there's a lot of the Bible that the Amish community doesn't want them to read.
Oh yeah.
So there's a lot of things that they don't know about, which I actually learned last week in conversation with somebody else. It's wild. Yeah.
It is wild. I'm just learning all kinds of new things. And that has been a really cool book to read.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for those. We didn't get into much conversation about the Holy Spirit, so I'm actually going to save this question for our next episode. So I'm not going to go there today because I think it'll be more resonant then. And then the last question is, if you were giving wisdom to your younger self, so if you, that, 13-year-old girl who switched from homeschool to regular school and then went through that period of like the first rebellious side, like if you were to have some wisdom to share with her today, what is it you would say?
Oh gosh, there's so many things like I think of that I would say. I would probably tell her to guard her heart and to continue to pursue God, because that was something I did not really do most of my 20s and 30s. And I would really just tell her that she needs to continue to keep her mind focused on the Lord and keep her heart open to the Holy Spirit and listen to the small whispers that come from the Lord and the Holy Spirit, not the loud screams that come from the devil. That's way easier to hear.
Yeah, I love that. That's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So good. I'm so grateful that you came on today. So
Yeah,
grateful. And I'll send you've got the link. So let's get the second episode scheduled up and we'll talk about all the things we didn't get a chance to talk about today. But your story is so powerful. And I didn't know much of it, but I knew that it would resonate with so many people. So I just am so grateful for you being vulnerable and sharing even the parts you aren't proud of. It's so powerful for you to do that, and will allow people who are in a similar situation to be able to step forward and share their story and also come back to God too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing. It's a time of healing.
Yes, it is. And so awesome. So is there anything you would like to leave the listeners with before we sign off this first episode? How can they follow you, find you?
Yeah. So on Facebook, I'm literally the only Amanda Hietter. It's spelled Hietter. I also do have a community. It's really geared towards women because that's where my heart is. And it's called Moving from Fear to Freedom. It's a Facebook group. And I'll send you the link, Angela, so you can put it in the show comments or the notes, I mean. And so really that community is all about lifting up women that are struggling with some form of abuse, or they're, a survivor from abuse, just to uplift them and let them know they're not alone.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today again. Thank you to all the listeners who have listened to today's episode of Evolve Through God, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Sounds good. Thank you, Angela.
Yeah.